Hello and greetings from Baltimore, Maryland, the home of the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. My name is Abra Bush, and I am the Senior Associate Dean of Institute Studies. I'm delighted that you could join us today for the 10th in our series of Summer Lunch and Learn events focused on the challenges and opportunities of remote instruction for music. The panel today will focus on applied instruction in a variety of forms. A special thanks goes to the academic leadership of many of the conservatories and schools of music in the United States and United Kingdom for their support of this series. They have graciously recommended a list of presenters who do excellent work in the area of remote and online pedagogy. Before we get started, I would like to thank 4 Peabody staff members who are joining us today and supporting this event. Adam Scalici from Peabody's production team will be in the background monitoring the webinar and working through any technical challenges we may encounter. Please send any comments regarding that directly to Adam in the chat. Patrick Wallen from the Dean's Office, Christina Mancior, and Jacqueline Scavetta will be here working with me, monitoring the chat and the Q&A for your questions, and help curate those questions throughout this session. A very special thank you to all of them as well. So before we begin, many of you are already doing it, but please go ahead and jump into the chat. Make sure it's marked to all panelists and attendees, and introduce yourselves. We'd love to see who's with us today, where you're from, and get you accustomed to putting information in there. We hope you'll consider this an interactive session. We'll spend about half of this hour on speaking directly with the presenters, but we hope that you'll ask your questions in the Q&A area of the webinar. We'll monitor those very specifically. And the great news is that the presenters have agreed to permit us to record this webinar. The session will be posted to the Peabody Keep Teaching website within 1 to 2 business days, should you wish to refer to it again or share it. And now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest presenters for today. Denise Graves is Professor of Voice at the Peabody Institute. Jeff Helmer is Professor of Jazz Studies, Jazz Piano, and Associate Director for Academic Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. Jonathan Bailey Holland is Professor of Composition and Chair of Composition, Contemporary Music, and Course Studies at the Boston Conservatory at Berklee, as well as a professor in the Vermont College of Fine Arts Low Residency Composition Program. Robert Van Cise is Professor of Percussion at the Yale School of Music, the Curtis Institute, and the Peabody Institute. And Alexander Schramm is the Program Leader of the Bachelor of Music and Foundation Programs at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance in the UK. Their full biographies may be found on the Peabody Keep Teaching website. So, Denise, I'd like to begin with you, if we may. What have been the significant challenges and how have you been dealing with applied instruction during this pandemic?
Thank you so much, Dean Abra, and hello, everybody. I'm happy and thrilled to be here and be included in this discussion today. So as Dean Abra told you, I'm Professor of Voice at Peabody Conservatory. I myself have had a career on the stage for more than 30 years now. And I love teaching, and I love working with young voices. I think all of us here do love teaching. When you see that moment dawn of understanding on their faces, it makes it all worth it. But we didn't set out to become online teachers, nor does our art form itself lend itself to such. And as students and teachers, we'd spent years learning in classrooms, and we don't have the same depth and breadth of experience with online teaching as we've had with synchronous instruction. I've had some experience over the years working with Skype and FaceTime if there were scheduling problems or if I was away on location. But now to have to work online indefinitely was something very, very different. So I created a little video today to share with everybody about those first few weeks of getting started with the Zoom lessons. Adam, I don't know if you're there to be able to cue the video.
Yeah, please. Thank you, Adam.
Emma Dickinson has entered the waiting room.
Hello.
Hi, Sugar Pie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you.
Oh, let's see.
We still. Oh, honey, you look really pretty.
Oh, thank you. Same to you.
Did you? Okay. Are you there still?
You're muted.
I'm
So-
muted. Elizabeth? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Here it is. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The sound was stopping a lot. And are you there? No, I don't hear you. Can you say something, Caitlin? Oh, yeah, no, I heard that, but it was really low. Is it? I may have to change my location. See if that makes a difference at all. I don't know. You're using the computer audio. Max? Max? Valerie? Valerie? Can you hear me? Are you there?
Oui, je suis là.
Boy, all of this takes some adjusting, doesn't it?
And they went,
That's much better. That's much better. This time and the time before that was much, much better. What did you do?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, terrific.
So,
All right, very good. Spectacular. Okay, that was killer. Thank you.
first,
Thank you.
I am just flabbergasted that you made this video. It's fantastic. And I think it really describes what so many people have been experiencing over the last few months.
That's right. And the material was there already because one of the great advantages that we've had, I think one of the things that I will continue to do as I teach is that we've got this playback with Zoom. And now the kids can create these digital libraries of each one of their lessons. I think that's spectacular. But in the beginning, it was quite difficult. Everything was compromised, and it took so much effort to get a less than ideal result. And it required so much more planning, creativity, time, and energy. And the Zoom lessons were intense and exhausting, right? And what I really craved were sort of the blue sky discussions that generated from being together, that these organic ideas that were born out of these moments of being together. So to answer your question in the very beginning, Dean Abra, one of the things that we did in terms of building community in our studio, one of the very first things we did was this mosaic video with all of the students in my studio, where we created this pure imagination. I think I sent that to you, this pure imagination video. And then we did the same thing for the graduating class. And then we would create Zoom rooms where we would just have people come and talk and just hang out and express whatever they were feeling, express their frustrations or their disappointments for not having the opportunity to do the opera or their recitals or whatever it was. And then that turned into cooking classes and sometimes pajama parties and that sort of thing. But it's been quite the learning curve. It meant that I had to go out and get equipment and purchase like an H4n Pro, a handheld 4-track 24-bit recorder, this interface thing, the SD cards, the Zoom mic and boom stands, mic clips, all of these things that I had no experience with before. But I believe that probably we will begin to see these classes get folded into the curriculums of the conservatories, because I believe that this is probably going to be a part of our lives. And as we move forward, you know, we're going to have to learn more and more about recording for the voice students. So, you know, each one of the students, I had to completely rethink my teaching and make it much more productive, and so that there were more tools in my tool belt, as it were, and to create an individual educational plan for each one of the students, because everybody has their own individual way in which they are best able to learn. Some are kinesthetic, some are auditory, some are, you know, visual learners, some are more tactile, and I had to just find out what worked well for each student and design a program for each one of the students. Fortunately for me, I don't have a very, very large studio, but I've enjoyed the sessions very, very much, and I think the students have too. It's been something that, you know, I think that we're going to keep very much folded in, because it's allowed me to, for example, invite musical luminaries in the profession into the Zoom classroom. Sometimes I had very well-known singers Zoom bomb a classroom and just, you know, peek in, and that was a lot of fun for the students. And then I started inviting in language experts, movement experts, acting coaches into the sessions. And with some of the students who were working on specific roles, for example, I reached out into the community and would find someone who was very prolific at singing a particular role and invited them into the studio with us as we worked together on the role. So I think that's been an incredible opportunity and advantage for the students, and made those made our sessions so rich. And again, they have got this great, you know, they've had this fantastic recording of our times together that they can keep for the whole of their lives. So I think in that way, it's been a real plus. Obviously, with singing, there are issues of delay and distortion and that sort of thing. And we found, depending on what they have available to them, sometimes it was a question of the students being able to eat. The whole family was at home, or they were in an apartment building where they couldn't. I had to conduct one class, one voice lesson in the girl's car, because the only place where she could sing.
Wow. Wow.
Are you still hearing me? Looks like the screen is gone. We still there?
We're still here. I'm afraid it might be latency on my side. You know, this has all been so brand new to you in the last few months. But for people like Jeff, you've been doing some of this work for quite some time with Coursera and other courses. So Jeff, what's happening at UT Austin, and how has this transition to remote instruction played out in your world?
Well, thanks, Dean Abrams. I really appreciate being here today. Yes, I got into teaching organized classes online quite a few years ago through edX, and I've been doing that often, and that's worked out well. But I'm actually a little bit of a neophyte to online lessons. I hadn't taught an online lesson until we entered the pandemic, so I was thrown into the you know, soup along with many of you in that respect. But I was able to hopefully take some things from that online experience with creating a jazz appreciation course into the lessons. And I think a couple of those things are to develop short learning segments. So to have, make sure that the amount of time that you're spending on a topic is not too long. And that's definitely different than what might happen in a face-to-face applied lesson. So I think planning for shorter segments of learning that are more focused on particular skills, you know, I think that works a little bit better, at least for me, in the online lesson environment. And then the other big adjustment, and it's about really asynchronous kind of teaching, which of course a lot of the jazz appreciation course completely was on edX, which is so the planning of what goes on with the teaching that doesn't happen during the lesson. Or like I've been talking about it lately, it's the lesson before the lesson and the lesson after the lesson. And so I really related to what Denise was saying about all that extra preparation that needed to be done before the lesson and also after. So that's changed a lot of things. So it's, asking students to do more recording on their own and more preparation on their own of a different type rather than just practicing, but actually creating and sending recordings in advance of the lesson so that the teacher can review the recording before the lesson, and then the time together in the lesson can be maybe more effectively spent, at least a part of that time, just talking about what that recording and listening to that recording, which is of hopefully a better quality than what we sometimes get in Zoom or even Clean Feed. Talking about that recording and listening to it and commenting on it rather than actually engaging in the music making experience online. So that's definitely been an important thing. And the other thing that I've found is I needed to leave time after a lesson to make whatever recordings or just kind of reference any materials, make sure that I get the student those materials right after the lesson so that it maximizes their productivity over the week. So Abra, you and I were talking before about how we used to have lessons back to back to back and all that. And now I don't do that anymore. I leave a buffer zone so that I can make, especially in jazz, it's really, I think, important to make some recordings for the students and so they can have some oral models. And so I do that right after the lesson and then try to get that to the student as quickly as possible. So it takes your 1 hour lesson or your 50-minute lesson and kind of turns it into almost a 2-hour experience at least, and definitely with a lot more advanced planning. So I think those have been the big things in addition to adjusting to the technology. And at the Butler School, we've put together some recommendations. I don't want to talk too much about technology, but at the Butler School, we put together some recommendations, and we're happy to share those. And I know Peabody has those in a lot of other places too. So we're trying to help our faculty maximize the experience, get the best audio and video quality possible. But I think zeroing in on shorter learning episodes of whatever we're trying to teach, I think is more productive in an online environment. So that's one of the big adjustments that I've made and that we're working on at the Butler School.
Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
I think the question about platforms and technology is so authentic to each institution and each instrument to a degree, and
Right.
sort of the comfort level of the participants involved and the faculty that, it's hard to say what's best for any
Right.
one person, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So before we turn to Alex to hear what's going on at Trinity Laban, I will tell all of you that Denise's Wi-Fi has gone out, and so she's trying to hop back on. It might just take a few moments, so we'll hopefully get her back here in just a moment. Alex, I'll turn to you and ask how all of this has worked itself out at Trinity Laban. I know for some time you've been dealing with sort of hybrid and blended learning. So what's been happening there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of conservatoires, universities in the UK haven't had that much experience of online learning, blended learning models. So when the lockdown hit, a lot of people were coming to us for advice because we've had a lot of blended learning programs for a while. We were certainly able to help with the pedagogy and the equipment, but of course, the students that come to us for our in-person programs, they haven't applied for blended learning programs. So it's sort of overnight massive digital upskilling of all the students and staff has been, quite amazing actually. Just hearing it with everything that Denise was saying earlier, and also Jeff about the use of recordings, and this has been exactly the same in the UK, that we've been finding our way, and we've certainly found that the shorter learning episodes is great. Actually leads to more focused work for a lot of students. The difficult thing for us as an institution, which I'm sure is the same for everyone, is that it's very difficult to support the students when they're not with you on campus or in your environs. So really the students have relied on us, as sort of an equalizer of opportunity. And sometimes it's much harder to support them, if they don't have access to your pianos, if they've got neighbors that bang on the wall whenever they play a note, if they don't have a laptop or any kind of, strong Wi-Fi, that's really been really hard. But on the other hand, some students have really blossomed, and it's been quite emotionally overwhelming at times to see, an alternative assessment, some kind of recording where they've just gone with it, and there's sort of sheer creativity, and it's just amazing. And then you remind yourself a lot of musicians actually have very successful careers doing that sort of work. So why not? You know, learning outcomes are met. So we just basically, we have a lot of institutions in the UK where we sort of get together and we share in best practice. We need to make sure that come September, we're all offering sort of the same, you know, offer. We can't have every university music college doing completely different things because it's impossible for students to navigate. So we've been helping out a lot with that, also with the bureaucracy, as you can imagine. And so I think the students really, when they're contacting me, is they want to know what they've got to look forward to in the autumn term. And that's really the main thing. That's the focus of our activities, is putting together a sort of a package of really exciting projects for them to get involved with. So they've got hope and they've got, you know, ambition still. Interesting, we've got record demand for courses at the moment for September, because students don't really want to stay at home and do nothing. They want to come and study, they want to do something, and they're looking for us for guidance and inspiration. So that's where we are at the moment, sort of trying to put together some really exciting opportunities for them to get involved with.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm very pleased that Denise is back with us in spite of the challenges that our students are facing right now of internet stability. You'd hope that out of all of this comes some kind of equality in terms of internet as a public utility, as opposed to just a privilege for all of us, right? Jonathan, you've been teaching remotely for some time, teaching composition remotely for some time, and you also chair a rather large composition program. So I'm curious what you've learned in terms of teaching composition remotely, but also then how you're planning to deploy composers into the mix this fall.
The good news about teaching composition is that it's primarily conversational based. So whether we're sitting in the same room or on the other side of the world, as I was this morning with some students, the format hasn't really changed. The technology is what you want it to be. I think my experience with Vermont College of Fine Arts, which just as a primer for those who may not know about the program, it's a low residency master's degree program. So students are in the program for 2 years, but they come for 1 week and have a very intense week of presentations, master classes, performances, and then they're set up with a mentor and spend the next 6 months at home checking in with their mentor every 2 to 4 weeks. And that program, we never thought of it as an online program. It was a remote program, meaning that the focus is not so much on posting things online, but rather working remotely, which meant that we weren't concerned about whether it was Zoom or Skype or the telephone, or if somebody lived close enough, meeting, you know, at a coffee shop or at somebody's studio, whatever worked. I think that experience has kind of helped with all of this experience and not worrying so much about all of the technological challenges that we are experiencing even this morning. Perhaps that is an advantage that composition has that other instruments don't. But I will say, to connect with one of the comments from earlier, that I think the biggest challenge we find, and I think this is true for all private lessons, that on some level you become also your students' social workers, psychologists, and however else that works. And I think, you know, there's the advantage if you're playing clarinet that at some point you have to actually play the clarinet during the lesson, but with composition it's all conversational. So it's easy for those things to kind of become the focus. And I will say that it is a challenge. I think realizing that being in the same room and talking with someone actually does a lot to work through some of those challenges that you just can't do even if you're still speaking with someone remotely. But beyond that, in terms of how all of this has worked, I think we've seen more advantages than disadvantages in terms of what I've experienced and what I've heard from many of my colleagues. In terms of deploying composers, at one point at Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, we have made the decision to be completely remote in the fall, but we were looking at a hybrid model at one point, and we talked about having composers working on arrangements for orchestral conductors, for instance, who weren't going to be able to get in front of an orchestra, but still wanted the experience of working with whatever repertoire they were expecting to work with a smaller group. So giving the composers a chance to get their hands on some of these standard rep works and reimagining them for random ensembles. You know, I was telling my colleagues, composers can make the arrangement for the 6 violas and 2 piccolos if we need to, because that's a challenge that we have to deal with. But I think that is a great opportunity at what I assume will be a point when we are hybrid to, I think, break down the preciousness of a lot of this repertoire that we feel like we can't touch, either through making arrangements or interpretations of the repertoire, and really taking advantage of this opportunity to strip away all expectation and try new things.
I think those of us on the classical side of the house could learn a lot from our colleagues on the jazz side of the house about some of those things, because they seem to just be able to fluidly go through those processes, and yet we hold on to the precious, as you said. Bob, you and I have had some wonderful conversations this summer about how percussion instruction has worked during this time. I mean, when all of this started in March, frankly, you were one of the faculty members I worried about the most, because I wasn't sure how you were going to manage this. So I'd love to hear from you about how this has all played out for you.
Sure. Just first of all, thanks a million for organizing these things. They really give hope when we're all coming together. And Denise, thanks for a little bit of levity. I think all of us could use a laugh once in a while, and I think we realize now a little bit more how important that is. And when Jonathan's speaking about the luxury of being a composer, it makes me drool as a percussionist a little bit like when my son was a young guy and studied classical guitar, used to take his guitar out under a tree and practice. We have a 2.5 hour setup before anybody plays the first note, and then a breakdown into a truck to get back to the building after a concert. So, you know, they're just a couple of sort of broad sweeping ideas, and then a few specific things that you and I talked about, Abra. I think that supposedly life tells us that with a little bit of age, we get wisdom. I haven't ever seen any evidence of that yet. And I'm approaching that moment where you get asked at the Amtrak counter whether you need a senior discount or not. And I still haven't seen the upside of that. I've seen an awful lot of you can't remember anybody's name or any of those sort of things, but the wisdom hasn't really kicked in. But there are 3 really big crucial things that I think that the last 5 months has taught me. Number 1, change is the only constant in life. That number 2, adaptation is the mechanism by which we evolve. And number 3, that music is a gift. What will normal look like after the pandemic is a question that I think every one of us has almost every week from our students. And I wish I had an answer for my kids for that. And I think that the hopeful side of me, though, does say we'll somehow come out stronger. I think that we will have learned things. We've added to the fabric of what we do, different methods of delivering to people how we make music, and different ways that we can offer pedagogy to people farther afield than just the cities where we all teach. We've also seen the incredible necessity of our colleagues. Denise's discussion of who's willing to Zoom bomb in, and here comes a celebrity who sings a role that just makes everybody's adrenaline rush when you're a 20-year-old young singer of who just joined. We didn't used to think of even asking those things. And now I've got my greatest colleagues asking all the time, hey, can you come teach a couple lessons for me? And nobody discusses any of the arrangements other than how can I help? So the main thing I think, Abra, you wanted me to talk about is this kind of funny way that I teach. So how do you teach percussion in a situation like this? Well, the first thing we did is I happened to work for really great administrations in all 3 of the institutions that I work for. And all 3 of my administrations let us kind of come in and steal as many instruments out of the building as possible to get gear into the apartments and dorms of my students. So we could even entertain a conversation of making music, because for us, we need stuff. And so our stuff off it went into everybody's apartments. It was sometimes a little bit funny to teach marimba lessons with no resonators on a marimba. It sounds a little bit like a coffee table more than a marimba like that, but it does let us do something. But in my first few lessons, I had such a struggle hearing any quality of sound. And I thought, when I was watching these faculty meetings of some of my piano colleagues discussing, you know, in the upper register of the piano, it's slightly less full of high harmonics in Zoom than it is on Skype. And I'm like, excuse me, dude, what an unbelievably luxurious problem you have. How do you teach a timpani lesson to somebody who has no timpani? Okay, that's a problem. And so what we decided to do, Abra, you and I have talked about this, is I decided that all of these attempts that Denise showed us so well in her video weren't really yielding very much. So I decided, okay, let's just work the same way I work with my kids when they're getting ready for their Aspen audition. Send me your tape, we'll critique it together, and then we'll see us. At first, we got an awful lot of the responses of, okay, they would send me the tape and we would try to critique it together, and I would kind of get these sort of answers of, well, I don't know, Bob, I think it sounds pretty good. What do you think? That's not terribly participatory, okay? So I'll tell you what we need to do. We need more on your part. So the sort of scenario that I invented was this. I said, okay, you and I are now members of an international jury. And this person we're now gonna watch play for us is in the third person. This is not you. This is just somebody. So take your ego out of it. Take the hurt out of it that can come from criticism. Open your mind and let's teach you how to self-analyze. Abra, it turned fantastic. So that same kid who started with the, I'm not really sure, Bob, what do you think, would go, yeah, just so you know, Bob, this guy's time is horrible, but only exceeded by how bad the sound is in the second movement. And I'd be like, okay, we're getting somewhere now. But the other thing that we got, Abra, on the other side, on the flip side, was positive things. People being able to see their own playing from the outside and think, I'm a little bit better at this aspect of my music making than I thought I was. Courage. And then the other thing that we started to do then was that students would put together 3 separate weeks worth of lessons on the same piece. And we would play, here's how you sounded 3 weeks ago. There's how you sounded last week. And here's how you sound this week. And let's talk about what practice methodologies you employed in the most successful of those weeks. And I have just seen the partnership come. I mean, we're all in the same business, Abra, true or not true. We're all trying to work ourselves out of a job. If we're doing this well, we're all trying to make ourselves less necessary as we go through the teaching of our students. And for that, the more partnership that we gain from them, the deeper that goes and the faster it goes. And last thing that I would say is we're all pretty darn lucky for what we do for a living, huh? Inspired by magical, creative, courageous young people and being given the mission to help guide them through one of the most important moments of their life.
Thanks, Bob. There are a number of questions I've seen kind of coming in about how in the world you do teach timpani if you don't have anything else. And I know you've talked about how you were teaching timpani using a snare practice pad and a recording. So could you maybe elaborate about how that goes for you?
I was afraid that might actually get a question in that. I would have to elaborate. Forgive me if I embarrass myself. We'll take a Beethoven 7th Symphony first movement timpani part. There are no timpani sitting in front of my student. They do have a snare drum practice pad. So what we do is we turn it into sort of a play-by-play, like in a baseball game. All right, we've started in A minor. We're moving ourselves around to a new key here, okay? And if you really care, we have to tune a new pitch here. If you hear the trumpet part in bar 14, there's the pitch you need, okay? The motive that I've got to now come in and join is in the trombones, okay, et cetera, et cetera. Just what do you need to hear and how do you need to interact with the music making other than the actual striking of an A natural on a 29-inch timpani? So we can do that, but Abra, I think one of the things that Denise said and all my colleagues have referred to, including the magical session of those 4 wonderful people last week, is there's only so far this can take us. And there's only so much I can make somebody learn to play timpani, no matter how much lateral thinking I want to employ under these circumstances. And I think that as we navigate this difficulty, we also need to take some of this time to prepare for the other side of this and to employ what we've learned here when we can actually get back face to face with our students.
Thanks, Bob. One of the themes that continues to kind of be teased out, I think every time I talk to groups of faculty members like you, all of you, and others, is this question about community and how community is different via Zoom or whatever platform you're using, and ways in which you're all thinking about the building of community during these times. Denise, I want to go back to you because you started to allude to some of the cooking sessions and other things you've been doing. A little bit about the challenges and opportunities of community during this time.
Thank you, Dean Abra. Well, as I said in the beginning, you know, at first it was everyone was quite stunned, and then we had to kick into high gear and figure out how we were going to move forward. And a lot of the students were deeply disappointed in having to miss their recitals or the opera or whatever it was that they were involved in. And so I think, as Jonathan, you know, spoke about in the very beginning, was a lot of hand-holding and don't worry, we're going to get through all of this sort of conversations. And then I could see that everyone was really missing, we were really missing the world, we were missing contact with each other. And so sometimes in the voice lessons, depending on how they were scheduled, sometimes if they were scheduled back to back, one lesson would run long, and then I'd invite the other person into the room, and then that would strike up a conversation with that particular student. And then this idea was born about just holding these hangout Zoom sessions where we could discuss whatever it was that people were feeling, or even just discuss talking about, you know, the pieces they were working on, or having a discussion on, you know, breath support, or having a discussion about, you know, focus, or whatever it was. It sort of turned into these spontaneous studio classes. And then fortunately for us in my studio, we all like each other, but it's a studio full of girls, so that's also was really convenient because we like so many of the same things. So we would often talk, and Peggy and I both are great cooks. We love cooking, and we often host dinner parties for our students, you know, pre-COVID, or what was that you said the other day, Dean, or BC, you know, before COVID. And so it started turning into cooking classes, and I would invite my kids in, and then we would make something and send them to the other students. We did that. In fact, I got the address wrong on one of the students, and she just received a batch of cookies that were sent in May. I said, don't eat them, whatever you do. You know, but so it was kind of created organically out of what was happening anyway in the Zoom rooms with each of the students, and then we turned that into game night, and we just last Friday had pajama night where we sat around and talked about, you know, truth or dare and that sort of thing, and just had a fun time being together. And that's really helped a lot the morale of all of the students, and us too. You know, as Bob said, you know, teaching them has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. I've spent so much time on the stage, and I didn't think that I could ever, you know, I'd always been so myopic. I didn't ever think that I could ever be as interested in anybody else's career or development as I was of my own. And that's been the biggest shock of my life, to see that, you know, how these students have permeated and how their well-being and their success is so much a part of my thinking, and they take up so much, you know, thought traffic because they have become like my children. So it's been important how they have been doing. And also, I think going forward that the success of what has happened this spring, and also some of the work this summer, encourages them to move forward in case we do have to continue in an online platform. I think that the experience has been a rewarding one for all of us, has been enriching, and I think that they, in some ways, you know, the Zoom sessions have been so intense and allows us to really see what's going on with their faces and really examining what's happening in your jaw and what's happening with your tongue. And in some ways, it's given us that advantage to really, you know, we really have to focus in and look at them and watch what it is that they're doing. That I think, I certainly can't speak for them, but I think that the experience, I would like to think, of course, it depends on the instructor too, but I would like to think that the experiences that we've had together have been as enriching. They've been very, very different from being in person, obviously, but I think they have been also equally rewarding because we have all had to learn to dig deep and to really open up our imaginations because we want them to succeed and we want them to have a great experience. You know, we can't unlive what's happened these past couple of months, but we can certainly try to make that as beautiful and as creative and as we can.
Thank you. It's exciting to hear that things have gone as well as could be possible during this time, and the support that you've given to students. I know many of us have also been involved in conversations with our own colleagues and working to support them in ways that we maybe haven't in the past. That's certainly true of myself and my colleagues across the conservatory sector. Jeff, I know you pitched in really to support folks throughout Butler. How has that community been for you, and what have been the real wonderful lessons learned there?
Well, it's just been really gratifying, along with my great colleague Bob Duke. We put together mostly focused a course, what we call a meta course in online instruction. And again, that's mostly focused on organized classes a little more than the applied lessons, though I think there's a lot of things that are analogous there. So I think that's helped bring us together and help just share our experiences in that way. I also wanted to mention one of the things that Bob does that I really like is in his classes, and you can certainly do this in a studio class. Immediately in the first 2 minutes of a class, he'll randomly put whatever our appropriate number of group of students is in a breakout room and just let them chat, just to try to recreate what happens when students come into a studio class and they get there a few minutes early and they just start talking to one another. So have them chat about whatever they would like to talk about, not necessarily at all the subject matter. So I think that's, you know, a really helpful device that you could use, you know, that would help build community that way. And the studio classes that's been surprisingly, I think, a good part of online, or surprisingly adaptable part of online teaching from pre-pandemic to now. We can't play for each other as much, but a lot of the things we do in studio class, listen to recordings and maybe look at transcriptions, look at scores, analyze music in that way, and a lot of things, if we have a good setup as performers, we can demonstrate to students. So those things are all, you know, I think have transferred pretty well and worked out pretty well in the online environment.
Denise?
I was just reminded of something that Jeff said. This summer I had some students involved in the Des Moines Metro Opera Young Artist Training Program, which was completely online. And what I've always sort of preached to the students is that every time you perform, you never know who's going to be there in the audience. And you have to give that moment. You have to surrender yourself entirely to that moment and give everything that you have to that moment. You have to pretend that it's your Metropolitan Opera debut or your Carnegie Hall debut. And so I had two students, and this is very exciting news, who were part of Des Moines' program. They had a Death by Aria evening. And they just thought that they were participating in that exercise. And out of that, both of them got contracts to young artist programs. They had not, intentionally, this was not something that was designed, for them to audition for those different companies, but it happened as a result from their video submission online in, that young artist training program. So that was incredibly positive, and it excited the whole of the studio. So I was just reminded of it just now about what Jeff was saying, that even we're still performing. It's not the way that we're used to. But every time we have an opportunity and a privilege to get out there and to share and to tell a story and to create something beautiful, you never know what may happen from that. And that was two beautiful, unexpected happenings that occurred in the online setting.
Many of you have alluded to sort of group projects that your students have done. And I know, Alex, that certainly happened with the Well-Tempered Clavier project that happened at Trinity Laban. There are kind of two schools of thought, I think, around some of these projects, right? That no one wants to see the Brady Bunch blocks on the screen. Yet on the other hand, I think that there is something to be said for the community building experience of those projects. Alex, how did that sort of play out for all of you at Trinity Laban? And is that something you think you'll continue into the fall?
I think so. I think the reason we use those projects the last couple of months is that every student was in such a different set of circumstances. You had to think of a project where everyone could contribute meaningfully, and enthusiastically, and not, be quite sad that they didn't have this amazing Steinway in their front room, wherever they happen to be living. So you had to create a project where, which allowed everyone to contribute in that way. But as we move into the autumn term, we're going to be doing similar, group music making projects where everyone can, where the students can really own the theme and curate it. But obviously we'll learn on the experience of the last 2 months in that. But we found that these, projects that bring people together is the best way for community building, because we do really miss each other. We miss seeing each other in the building all the time, and all those chance interactions that lead to great, projects. So we do weekly town hall sessions on MS Teams, and everyone comes because, if you book out your largest physical space and say 12 o'clock on Wednesday, you'll get some people, but no one has to travel in now. They can all log on, and everyone's saying, wow, it's so exciting to hear what everyone's doing. Well, these people I've known for years. And now, in a way, there's a much better sense of community. I think more of us know more about each other than perhaps we did before. And I think the other thing about the projects is that they provide a structure. A lot of our students miss that structure, the weekly structure, daily structure. So to have a time where they can log in and they know that activity is going to happen and they're going to be in online breakout groups, then come back together and feed in. I think that's very important. The asynchronous work is great, and it great focused learning, but you need the synchronous work to develop a sense of community. And so that students feel that they are together online, doing something together. I think it's very important.
Jonathan, I know that you've had a number of guests visit both ensembles as well as maybe composers as well throughout this pandemic to with your students and the department students. And Denise, you alluded to that as well. This idea of community and just kind of asking people to Zoom bomb in has come up with us. But I'm curious, are you finding that people are remaining generous with their time, or how? Denise, there was a very specific question about whether you were paying folks to kind of come in and join you. What has that looked like for you, Jonathan, at Boston Conservatory? And then I'd ask Denise to chime in too.
I will say that, if anything, I think this has caused us all to embrace the idea that you can do more things remotely than we realized we could do or wanted to admit that we could do. So we have a flat fee that we pay to people who come in for seminars, and we've continued to pay that fee. But now we can, essentially ask anyone anywhere to come in because we don't have to worry about travel and how they're going to get here and adjusting to schedules. So that has opened the door in many ways. In terms of working with musicians, we had a project for our composers at Boston Conservatory to work with the Quince Ensemble, which are 4 singers who, like many ensembles today, don't live in the same location. And then we went remote, and they had planned to rehearse the pieces once they were all together in the same location, which they couldn't be. And they amazingly figured out how to record themselves individually, and they figured out the technology and still were able to provide our students with great recordings of their works, which was sort of the essence of what we wanted them to have. So I think there are easy ways around all of this. And I will add to the community piece. One thing that I think I'm trying to embrace more is that what's often the disadvantage of being online is that it removes some barriers that sometimes I think are good in terms of, maybe decency and how we treat people online. But the flip side of that and the positive side of that is that I think people are willing to take a little bit more of a chance and to be more honest in positive ways. And I think that, one thing that we found with our students, we often require our graduating composers to present their music to their colleagues. And without being able to do that in person, one of our faculty members recommended that we have them do podcasts. And if they wanted them to be video podcasts, they could do that. And suddenly, it's sort of like we've allowed them to work in a realm that they're more comfortable within, and so they have become more creative and more honest, and the feedback that they get from their colleagues has become more honest and direct, because it's something that feels more familiar to them and how they relate to one another. So just throwing that out there is another way that we've taken advantage of the technology to build community.
I think we too have found at Peabody that folks have been incredibly generous with their time and their talents over these last several months. We've been able to invite guests via Zoom in ways we never would have been able to. We've been able to get on their calendars in ways we've never been able to in the past. And so I would encourage any of you out there, think about who's aspirational and send them an email, because it's a lot easier right now to get folks to be supportive and to support your students than I think it ever has been. So I think that's an exciting thing to think about.
And to answer your question, Dean Abra, excuse me, please. I was not, the guests were not paid. They were basically, personal, favors that I called in and said, I called Audrey McDonald and said, would you do this? And she said, absolutely, I'd be happy to do it, or whomever the artist was. And so, and I've done the same when, so that's been really great, because people have the time now, or certainly more time than
That's right.
we've had.
Alex?
Just to add that a lot of our students, well, some of our students have said they prefer online masterclasses because they feel as if the person taking it is right there in front of them. And usually they might be fighting for a seat at the back of the hall. And it's almost like having a one-to-one lesson with them, these famous musicians right there on their laptop. So I think that's something we will continue.
A really valid point. Bob, what else are you going to continue? Bob and Jeff both.
Why don't I let Jeff go and then I'll jump in right afterwards.
Okay, just a brief thing. I was just going to point out that's a very important point there about students perceiving the online format as more of an intimate relationship with the teacher than many of us from previous generations feel. I definitely have experienced that in my large jazz appreciation class, as I've taught it in live settings and then I've taught it online, and definitely I feel like there's a much higher percentage of students online that feel a more personal connection to the professor in that format. So that's all I just wanted to add into there. So go ahead, Robert.
No, I appreciate that, Jeff, because I think sometimes we, those of us that are not of college age, think of this as an impediment, or as a, we are kind of an apologetic stance almost, that we're not spending time live with our students. But to your point, they're much more digitally native than we are in these regards.
Yeah.
Bob?
I think just one small observation, as we've listened to sort of 20 minutes of discussion from any number of different angles about the same thing, of how appreciative we've been to our colleagues and how much it takes a village to raise a child is true, and all of these other sort of things. But it is slightly embarrassing as an art form and as a species that we need to be clobbered over the head by something as radical as this to realize what we need to do to take advantage of the incredible pool of talent that is out there to help take our young students forward. And I even on a larger sweeping note, it wasn't just since Al Gore offered us an inconvenient truth that we all know what's going on with the planet. And let's really hope that all of this is a wake-up call to all of us on a much larger scale of how we interact with each other, our planet, and whether we give our children the future they deserve.
Thanks, Bob. Denise, you were gonna, I think, chime in on this.
Well, I was going to, but then after that, it doesn't seem really relevant now. But to the point, to your point earlier, whoever raised the question about being able to compensate the different artists, something that's been born in this whole COVID period is a new app called Resonance, specifically designed for singers. I don't know if you've seen that. It's called the Resonance app, which means that you can virtually now go on this app and request a session or coaching, a lesson or whatever with any of your favorite singers. So that was something that was created out of this moment, and a lot of people are working now within this Resonance apps. I know some of my students are too. If you love, you know, I don't know who, Thomas Hampson, or if you love Angel Blue, or no matter whoever it is, you can now be in touch with them to schedule individual lessons. So that was something that was born out of this moment.
It's terrific. In just the last couple of moments we have remaining, I'd love to go in the same order we started in and ask you one thing, what the most important bit of advice you might have for the attendees today about teaching in this remote or hybrid remote format as we move into fall. And so you'll need to limit that to about 1 or 2 sentences, but what are the key things you think that you might want to pass on that's worked for you, bits of advice or inspiration? And Denise, if you'd like to go first. Sorry to put you on the spot with that one.
Thank you. I would just say to, you know, I know that this is frustrating. This is less than ideal for everyone, but music is worth it. These kids are worth it. And I think that we just have to remain open and creative and just dig down into our imaginations to find a way to move the whole of the industry forward. Because I do believe that from this moment, I'm not sure that we're going to return back to exactly the way that things always were. I think that we will go forward. So I would just say be kind and be patient with yourself, and as we find our way through this.
Thank you. Jeff?
Patience was like the word on my mind right there, Denise. So I would say be patient with yourself and be patient with your students and be compassionate with everyone involved, with your students and whoever you're working with on technology.
Alex?
Well, I would say talk to as many of your colleagues as often as possible, because, you know, we need to problem solve together and we need each other's support because it's tough. And secondly, you know, create conditions and frameworks which allow you to change everything instantaneously. Because I think we're going to have a lot of adapting to do week on week, month on month in the coming year, at least, not further than that. So those are the 2 things I'd say.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I would say, you know, take advantage of the opportunity to drop all expectations of how this is supposed to work and embrace the moment, and also remember that our students can provide as much wisdom on how to navigate this as we might think we're able to as well.
And Bob?
I think I'll just kind of borrow from something that Claire Chase said last week about the fact that this is a slow moment. We're not in the middle of the tornado that we live in all the time. And hi, Denise, nice to see you in the hall. I got to run, kind of with everything. It's a slow moment where we can do slow. There's a reason that people go to the Himalayas to think. And I think that we need to use this slow moment to reconsider what our art form will be afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise and Jeff and Alex and Jonathan and Bob, for your wonderfully insightful and inspirational comments today, and some really great things to think about as we continue forward in a country, at least here, Alex, where the virus is raging and is not at all in a place where we had hoped we would be as school starts in the next couple of weeks. I also really want to thank specifically Christina Mancior, Zane Forshee, Patrick Wallen, Robin McGinnis, Adam Scalici, and others for their support for this series. They have been incredibly helpful as we mounted this. I also want to thank all the participants. We had over 5,000 unique registrations for this series. over the last 9 weeks for 10 total sessions. And so I can't thank all of you enough for tuning in and for being supportive of these sessions. They've been impactful not only for Peabody faculty and staff, but also I hope throughout the United States and maybe even a couple other places in the world, which is pretty nice. All of the sessions and many of their chats and other auxiliary materials are available on the Peabody Keep Teaching website. I encourage you to take a look there and also send them along to anyone you think might benefit from those. At the end of today's session, a brief survey should pop up in your browser. We look forward to your feedback and recommendations for future sessions, and I will underscore that. I sincerely hope that there are future sessions. We're having that conversation now, and if there are particular things you'd love for us to address over the next couple of months, please let us know. We'd love to continue this work and to be supportive of all of you out there who are going to be in some kind of a teaching situation in the fall, to be continued, I'm sure. Again, thank you all for your time today. Thank you to the panelists and the staff. We could not have done this without all of your support. I'll sign off as I always do. Stay well, wash your hands, make sure you sufficiently distance yourselves from others. Please wear your masks and enjoy the remainder of your day and the remainder of your summer. Bye, everybody.